Hey guys, Loïs here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to use flashcards for language learning. This is going to be a research deep dive. I've taken a look at the research on flashcards for language learning, for vocabulary learning, and I'm going to be talking about this and showing you the research, the actual facts. Now, if you're new to this channel, my name is Loïs, and I'm a language learner. My native language is French, so I had to learn English. And on this channel, I actually share, the information and the research that has been useful to me and that is still useful to me for learning languages. All right, so the first thing I want to say here is that if you don't know what a flashcard is, here I just want to be clear on what we're talking about. So a flashcard is a card. It can be physical, it can be digital, and you have a word written in your L2, and I'm going to be using the term L2 and L1 in this video. So L1 would be your native language. So I'm guessing for most of you guys, it's going to be English, and L2 is the language that you're trying to learn. It's your second language. So a flashcard has the L2 word written on one side of the flashcard, and you have the translation in your L1, in your native language, on the other side. So it can be sentences, expressions, or single words. And I'm going to be talking about sort of the research, what the research says on should you use sentences or should you use words. So in this video, I'm going to be talking mostly about digital flashcards because most people are going to be using digital flashcards, and there are many advantages of digital over physical flashcards. So if you've never used digital flashcards, actually, just a quick note here, I would highly recommend that you download Anki, which is a free piece of software. I'm going to put the link in the description. I use it. A lot of language learners use it. It's totally free. And if you want to get vocabulary decks for Anki, a lot of cards that, vocabulary decks that I created and optimized, you can go to my website. I'll put a link to my Anki decks in the description if you're interested. So the first thing I want to mention here is that contextual vocabulary learning, such as reading and listening, is often considered superior to flashcards. And actually, the research that I've looked at shows that flashcard learning is actually as effective, if not more effective, than learning vocabulary from reading and listening. And so the studies also suggest that flashcard learning, in fact, does improve your ability to use the words in a normal conversation. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And so research also shows that vocabulary learned through flashcards is long lasting. This is not just a short term kind of thing. So to me, the allure of flashcards really lies in the fact that you can learn lots of targeted words, so you can have a frequency list, and I've talked about this with Professor Paul Nation in the previous video, but you can have a frequency list and learn targeted words, a lot of them in a relatively short time. So this is not to say, obviously, that flashcards are some sort of panacea. In my interview that I mentioned with Professor Paul Nation, he clearly mentioned that flashcards on their own are not sufficient. It's simply a sort of a good initial step towards mastering new vocabulary. And in fact, Professor Paul Nation himself goes as far as saying that flashcard learning is one of the most effective vocabulary learning strategies, if not the most effective, depending on the study. So, for example, in 2011, Professor Paul Nation and Webb analyzed 12 vocabulary learning activities, and they concluded that flashcards were the most effective strategy. All right, so this is sort of an introduction, give you an idea of what we're talking about here. Now, I want to dive a little bit deeper into this argument that a lot of people have that learning with flashcards is a little bit artificial. It doesn't really translate into actual acquisition of the language. So during my interview with Professor Paul Nation, I mentioned this argument that a lot of the critics of flashcards often repeat, which is, Learning vocabulary through flashcards is artificial and it doesn't translate into actual acquisition of the language. And Paul Nation told me that actually the research clearly shows that flashcard learning results in explicit as well as implicit knowledge, meaning that yes, you have the knowledge of this word explicitly learned through the flashcards, but it also translates into actual understanding of the language and actual use of the language. So this is not something that you should be worried about. Now, another big topic when it comes to flashcards is retrieval. Now, let me just explain what I mean by this. Let's say that you're trying to learn the word bonjour in French, right? Hello. So you have the word bonjour written on the front side of your flashcard, and then you try to retrieve the meaning of this word in your mind. You're like, okay, bonjour, what is this? It means hello, if I remember correctly. And so this is retrieval. And research clearly shows that retrieval increases your vocabulary learning. This is a well-known phenomenon, retrieval, so you should definitely incorporate it in your learning. This is, you can sort of contrast this to when you're reading a book in a foreign language. For example, you read the book and there is a word that you don't know. There's no retrieval. You just look it up in the dictionary and you say, oh, okay, that's what it means. All right. So this is just, recognition. This is a very shallow depth of processing. Doing retrieval, actually asking yourself, what does this mean? Trying to dig deep in your mind does help with the remembering part. So the direction of the retrieval is also something that affects learning. And I think this is something that I have not, I've never mentioned this on my channel, but there are two types of retrieval. There's receptive retrieval, where you're presented with a word in your L2 and you have to remember its L1 meaning. So, for example, with the flashcards with bonjour, you just see bonjour and you ask yourself, okay, what does this mean in English? This means hello. This is receptive retrieval. Now, you have the other type of retrieval, which is productive. It's the opposite. I see the word in English on my flashcard, hello, and I ask myself, okay, how do I say this in French? Bonjour. This is productive retrieval. Now, research shows that receptive retrieval is good for, receptive, understanding. It increases your understanding, obviously. And productive retrieval is actually better for producing the language. There's no big surprise here. So ideally, you should be doing flashcards in both directions, receptive retrieval and productive retrieval. However, studies also show that productive retrieval alone actually increases receptive knowledge. So meaning that if you see the word hello and you have to translate it, produce the word bonjour, then this is going to increase your knowledge of your ability to produce it, but also to understand it to some extent, not as well as if you had to do receptive retrieval. So if you don't have time to do receptive retrieval and productive retrieval, I suggest that you just do productive retrieval. Now, I'd like to add a caveat here, and I've talked about this many years ago, I think. Productive retrieval, so having the word in English and having to guess the translation, is a lot more intense than receptive recall, where you look at a word and you just ask yourself, what does this mean in English? It takes more time. You're going to fail more often, so this means more reviews. And you get tired a whole lot faster. This is my big sort of issue with productive retrieval. You just tend to burn out a lot faster. So as a consequence, if you have limited time or limited motivation, to be honest, I would suggest, and I think it's perfectly fine for you to do receptive retrieval with your flashcards. Although this is not ideal, I would say that in the long term, this is something that is more, this is probably more sustainable. All right, so we're done with retrieval. Now, I want to talk about the different types of information that you should include in your flashcards. So one big decision that you have to make is, should you include the English translation of the words on the flashcards? Or should you do, they call it's called on the internet, I believe, monolingual flashcards. It's kind of big in the like Japanese learning community where you learn words in Japanese and you don't put the translation in English on the card. You actually put some sort of explanation in Japanese, in easier Japanese, or you put example sentences or some synonyms, for example. So some people have this misguided fear that by using your L1 when learning a language, that is going to lead you to sort of translate in your head, right? You think in English and you translate it to Japanese, for example, just because you use translations in your flashcards. However, I'm referring again to my discussion with Professor Paul Nation here, where he mentioned that if you don't use your L1 in your flashcards, that's fine, but that's not going to prevent you from translating in your head. This is not something that's going to help you in preventing that. And as a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, adding the L1 translation in your flashcards has actually been shown to be beneficial. Another thing as well that we should think about is that word flashcards get a lot of criticism for being out of context. So if you just learn a word, so you don't have sentence flashcards, but a word flashcard, people say, this is completely out of context. You don't really learn the word. This is sort of artificial. It's possible to add sentences to your flashcards to get some context. And it's surprising, but looking at the research, studies have actually shown that context has a little to no effect on vocabulary learning. And so instead of including sentences in your flashcards, which has been shown to apparently not really effective. And my own experience with sentences is that yes, they work, but they tend to induce a higher cognitive load, meaning simply that, if you have to work with sentences in your flashcards as opposed to words, this is going to require more brain power. So this is something to always that you have to think about, because using Anki is great, using flashcards in general is great, but this is this requires a lot of brain power. You're going to need a lot of energy to do the flashcards. So instead of including sentences in your flashcards, what I would suggest, what the research suggests, is that you use different techniques like the keyword technique. I've talked about this in the past. So for instance, if you're trying to learn the French word clé, so that's a key, like a key to a house, for example, it may be useful to think of an English word that sounds like clé. So for example, clé sounds like cliff, kind of, okay? And so you create a mental image that connects it to. So for example, there's a man on top of a cliff. I mean, he's dropping the key in the cliff type of thing. And so you have this image associated to these two words, clé and clé, which is a key that you drop off cliff. This has been shown in countless studies. Talked about this with Professor Paul Nation. This is effective for increasing vocabulary learning. Another useful tactic for learning words is word parts. So for example, if you're trying to learn the word prospect in English, and by the way, I'm taking these examples from the research that I read, so I'm going to definitely credit the sources in the description of this video. But if you're trying to learn the word prospect in English, you can break it down into its components, pro and spect, where actually pro means forward in English. It has this notion as in proceed or progress. And the second part of the word, spect, prospect, means to look, such as in spectacle or spectator. So you break it down into its components, and that is going to help you to learn the word faster. One thing I would like to mention here, and I've talked about, this was in my conversation with Professor Paul Nation. You don't need to use the keyword technique or word parts for every single word, because this is quite time consuming to, just make up an image with the keyword technique or break down words into their components. You should use these techniques with the words that you actually have trouble remembering. So another useful tactic consists in adding images or videos to your flashcards. I've done this a lot as well. Research shows that this type of visual information can be useful to illustrate the meaning of words, especially for nouns and action verbs. So having visual information helps you get information about the meaning of the word, the context in which it is used. Audio recording as well can help in learning vocabulary. So I've done this again using software like Subs to SRS. So what Subs to SRS does is it creates Anki flashcards using movies. So you have the subtitles of the movie and you have the movie. And so this piece of software breaks down the movie into flashcard. And so each flashcard has a sentence that was said in the movie with a screenshot of the scene and the audio at that particular moment in time. So this is really great, and this was my favorite way of learning vocabulary because it's fun. But I found that actually making the flashcards was extremely time consuming. And this is due to the fact that getting movies with their corresponding subtitles, well synchronized, in both languages, right? So I would get like anime in Japanese and I would have to get subtitles in Japanese. That is, the subtitles are well synchronized with the anime and the subtitles in English. And then I would have to use the software and process them. It's a buggy process, very time consuming. This is a little bit annoying. So, and it's also hard, right? And it's also probably illegal, right, to get movies and download them and process them and make flashcards out of them. So one caveat I would like to add to finish on this section about what type of information you should include in your flashcards is it's very easy to overload your flashcards with information, right? Screenshots, example sentences, cultural information, that type of stuff. Studies have found, and this has been my experience as well, that trying to learn different aspects of unfamiliar words may actually be counterproductive. And it's better to just focus on learning the meaning of the word when you first encounter it. Just focus on one thing. This was also in I don't remember what it was, but it was an essay on how to use Anki, a very long essay. And essentially one of the points was, if you use flashcards for learning anything, just one flashcard should focus on one piece of information. Don't try to overload the flashcard with multiple things. If you're adding multiple things in a flashcard, this should be divided into multiple flashcards. Make your flashcards, they call them atomic. So focus on one thing. All right, the next topic I want to mention is the scheduling of your reviews. So if you're using Anki or any language learning flashcard app, you're going to learn vocabulary using spaced learning. So this means that the same flashcard is going to be studied multiple times after certain intervals. And so this spaced learning has clearly been shown by the research to be more effective than other types of learning schedules, such as I think it's called mass learning. However, you may now wonder, well, okay, we're doing spaced learning, but how should the reviews be distributed over time to really maximize retention? So what is the schedule? In other terms, what kind of algorithm should we use to distribute the reviews to optimize for retention? And here, there has been some research on this, but all I'm going to say is that there is something called the lag effect, which, studies have demonstrated that having larger intervals between reviews actually facilitates longer term retention more than shorter intervals. So if you're trying to learn a word, long review intervals are actually better than short review intervals. In the short term, yes, your knowledge of the word may not be as good as if you were doing short intervals, but in the long term, you have better retention. Now, as far as what the best reviewing schedule is, I don't necessarily think, a lot of people are looking for the holy grail. I think this is more individual. I'm not really aware of any research that clearly says, this schedule is better or this one is better. This is really something that probably needs to be investigated more, but I would say that if you use Anki, you don't really need to worry about the scheduling algorithm. This is something that is reliable. It has proven its efficacy over time, so don't worry too much about this. I'll probably just keep this topic in mind for the future if there's any future, research demonstrating that a specific schedule is better than another one. All right, so that's for schedules. Now, the last topic I want to mention here is should you learn semantically related words together? What I mean by this is that there has been some research in the past that has argued that learning words that are semantically related, so such as, near synonyms like big and large, or you have antonyms as well, like hot and cold. If you, excuse me, if you learn them together, for example, this may actually interfere with your learning because you sort of get confused with the different words because they're somewhat similar. However, the evidence regarding this interference effect is not super robust. So there's more research, more recent research that is starting to question this effect, and they sort of fail to reproduce this interference effect. So for now, this is not something I would be overly concerned with. This is more a matter of personal experience. If you find that you have issues remembering words that are semantically related that you learn in one session, you just learn big and large or hot and cold, that type of stuff, then probably, just spread them out in different sessions. All right, so just another reminder here that I created flashcard decks for a lot of languages. So that's going to be on my website. So if you're struggling with vocabulary in your target language, then I invite you to take a look at my Anki decks that I made. They're optimized for retention with all the principles that I mentioned here. I'll put a link to this in the description. I really hope that you like this video. Let me know in the comments what type of video you want me to do next. So I'll see you next time.